Mouth's going around.
Yeah.
Mouth's going around.
Yeah.
Mouth's going around.
Okay.
All right, we are live. Absolutely. I think I think a lot of the points that he shares and some of the thoughts and feelings that he has as far as video game development goes and game development in general are that shared thoughts that I've had for a very long time when it comes to gaming, playing games, and it's. I mean, I've been in RPGs for a long, what, 33 years, I think. So if you haven't read the articles, I would definitely encourage people to go out and read those articles and see what this guy who has the experience in the gaming industry and has been intimately involved with some major projects, what the thinking is there behind the development of these games. There's a great deal of player agency, which is something that we're probably going to talk some about today. Um, that is really ingrained in the thought process. That's the overall view for me.
Promoting a game. It's boring and offers no value, at least in my opinion. But Matt, what about you, man? You
Yeah.
know, especially as a student now of game design, what's your takeaway on this one?
Yeah. Well, I guess one of the things that uh, that Warren Spector, the author of these articles, goes into detail on is player powered or player empowerment, which is kind of him talking about how the designer and player kind of almost work together to form the story together,
Hmm.
so that the player's decisions help form the story as it goes on. And you can kind of see a lot of that in his games. And I guess the easiest way to break that whole concept down is a term that is used commonly in game design. You hear it all the time in like books that you read and everything, which comes from meaningful decisions, which are essentially any decision that the player makes that has an actual change on the game itself. Like an example of a something that isn't a meaningful decision is like, I'm sure all of us have played a game where they have like dialogue options. You can choose like dialogue option A, dialogue option B, and then you come to find out that it didn't matter what you chose, and the dialogue kind of proceeds the same way anyway. That is what is
Yeah,
not
yeah,
a meaningful decision, because what you did didn't change anything.
exactly. There was no there's no representation of the outcome or the decision that you made. And I think that's an important piece. That's a very important and distinct piece in what Warren Spector mentions in his articles, but also that he puts into his games. And again, let's be clear here. He's not. I don't believe he's the only one to necessarily do it, especially not now. Um, but he was definitely one of the first innovators. I would say. And again, I could be wrong on that. There could be someone somewhere out there on some team that you know decided to do this first or sooner. But as far as I know, he's one of the few people and designers to kind of push that. Um, but back to my point is making that decision, but then having it be reflected in the game. That I think those two are like lock and key. If I make a decision, I want it to have some impact. I want to see it happen. You know,
You, you
I think for me, one of the no, When you
What
Greg?
you see it a lot now. I think, well, a lot more than you used to now
Hmm.
in video
Hmm.
games in particular, where um, I think it was the concept was quite clunky at first when it came into the video game industry, where a lot of games were produced with the concept of the game progression was going to be based on how you answered certain questions or
Hmm.
different choices that you made, and a lot of the early games with with a true reflection of this concept were literally that, where there would be a particular scene that would come up and you would have a choice to make, and based on the choice would determine how the game would progress from there. It's not that clunky anymore. It kind of happens in the background now, where as you play through a game, you can see that certain things in the game are going to be a little different based on the choices you make, or it could be reflected as a sort of alignment type of thing,
Hmm.
where if you're if you choose to do the good things as you're going through the game, then the game's going to kind of play through in a different way, where if you choose to be maybe not the righteous good guy, I'm gonna I'm gonna kill this guy just for the hell of it type of thing, then the game plays through on a different path.
Yeah, yeah. One of the and it's I'm glad you mentioned kind of the change over time. Growing up, I think this was I want to say early 2000s. This is about the time when the Xbox came out. So yeah, and a game came out for it. Some of you might know it. It's called Fable. And I remember that being one of the first games where your choices, you had that player agency where your choices mattered, but not only did they matter, they were reflected in the game world. So if like you said, Greg, if you were, a good person, people liked you. They interacted with you better. But if you were evil, not only did you, because I vividly remember this, not only did people kind of not want to have anything to do with you, like the NPCs and things like that. You were attacked on site in most cases, and the way they did Fable, if I'm remembering correctly, your character actually took on a different kind of visage. Like if you were evil, he would look the part. He would kind of get corrupted or what have you. And I think again, we talk about that now. That's kind of commonplace. All the things we're talking about, now that's kind of par for the course in a lot of games coming out now in some form or fashion to a greater or lesser degree depending on the game and the genre, but it's there. I think designers and developers have realized adding a bit of depth and player agency and having an effect on the game world with your actions, even if they're not in depth, um, tends to make for a better experience.
I agree. I agree completely with that. And you really see it in a lot of the newer games that are coming out, right? Right along with the advancements that have been made in the AI piece to the games,
Hmm.
and just the visuals in a lot of the newer games are fantastic. They're light years. I mean, I started out with video games back, with the oh, what the hell was it called? The Pong or whatever,
Yeah,
an Odyssey
the
system, if that tells you anything. Most
mhm,
people don't even know that ever existed.
yeah,
But where you really didn't have choices. To your choice was you either hit the little ball when it comes to your side of the screen, or you don't.
yeah. It
Um,
was a very binary system, positive
right,
and
right,
negative.
right. And going from that, where it was just super simple graphics, all the way up to looking at some of the video games that are out now. Some of the new ones, like the Resident Evil game that just came out, it's got some really neat graphics to it. The Cyberpunk game, not just because I'm a fan of Cyberpunk, but I mean it's I mean it's recognized as being basically one of the best, if not the best, when it comes to graphic content right now on the market. It's a very,
Yes.
very heavy game, and it's, provides you with that just beautiful and engaging background and scenery to really help you to kind of get invested in the game. Um, Now, you know, as a counterpoint to that, there are some games out there that have the immersion piece a little better at this point. But hopefully,
Hmm.
CD Projekt Red is working on that. It'll,
They are, and to their credit, they're working hard, and they've definitely taken their lumps along the way. But Matt, I think you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah. Um, because I think one of the reasons why I didn't see like these branching choices as often back in the day is because cause like um, because the author Spectre, he talks about making the story together with the player,
Mm,
but it isn't like a simple process as in like you just give them the skeleton as he had put it and let them put the meat on the bones because that is how he like worded it in his article. Like he gives you the skeleton of the story and then you put the meat on the bones. But the thing when it comes to like video games is that all that meat is stuff that he provided, because when you make a video game, like all those options and all the results are something that the designers created. We
mhm.
created all these different options for the player to choose from. So while he says, like, say, put the player puts the meat on the bones of the story, he's the one who provided, like, say, the different cuts of meat that the player can choose from. And that's a
Gotcha.
development cost that is probably why we didn't see it as often back in the day. Not just because of like the complexity of uh, games and how they've progressed over the years, but also just development costs of creating all these different options.
That is true. That is a very, very good point. I think, you know, I mean, obviously, I think we can all agree games have become very mainstream. That's not a bad thing, but they become very, very mainstream today.
Yeah, it's a huge
And
market.
again, yeah, that's not to say that they weren't popular back in the day, when I was younger, when Greg was younger, when you were younger. Um, but they didn't have the presence they do now. They're not as relevant. They're not as in the forefront. It was always, well, while you're wasting your time playing those video games, kind of attitude. And I think those individuals who ended up being, are you know, war inspectors and Hideo Kojimas and these titans in the industry, um,
the the
were
in
working with the.
the in the closet video game players, is that the ones you're talking about?
I mean, yeah, I guess so. I guess at some point, yeah, a lot of people just kind of kept their video game habits to themselves. But yeah, the guys that ended up being the titans of the industry, in all mediums, from tabletop to video game, a lot of them, I feel like they kind of stumbled through the process. But again, you guys, yeah, I can be completely wrong. But yeah, a lot of them stumbled through the process of kind of getting the experience and learning. So I think with Warren Spector and those like him, the idea of creating something that wasn't, how do I put this, very rote and kind of, A to B to C to D, really kind of really linear, which is oftentimes what you see in a lot of older games. Um, I think that's something that kind of they had to get to. They had to get to the point where they can be that expansive.
How do you how do you feel about, it strikes me, and this is just my opinion on this, but it
Mm,
strikes me that there's a lot of advancement, there's a lot of work that's being done in the industry, especially when it comes to the video games. piece.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, and this is just an opinion of mine, but on the other hand, looking at some of the new, or not really new, but the updates to existing systems that are coming out in the tabletop world, um, I I I can't help but get the sense that they're almost maybe even moving in the opposite direction. That we're so worried about the barrier to entry piece for reaching new players and bringing new people into these games and getting them engaged, that the player agency piece is almost backseated in a way. And how do you feel about that? I mean,
I'm gonna let Matt answer that one first, and I'll give my 2 cents. But yeah, I got something to say about that.
Now, like the desire to, like I guess, appeal to a wider audience in it as time goes on is like that's always like a business decision that almost always seems like a no-brainer because obviously you appeal to a wider audience. That means more people will buy the game, thus more money. So that's a very common trend that you see in a lot of series, like from like the first game in a series to the sequel. That'll happen a lot. Now, I do want to ask a question because you talk about how you feel as though player agency has been taking a back seat because of this. Can you go into a little more detail about what exactly you mean by that?
I just okay. So, and once again, just my my own personal personal thoughts on this. Um, but I look at a lot of the systems, and I'm just gonna take the the one that everybody recognized, D&D. Okay, I
Mhm.
look at a lot of these systems, but D&D in particular, and I look at the progression from the early game, um, taking it all the way back to the original red box set of what would be called basic D&D, just Dungeons and Dragons, which was literally just a dungeon crawl. I mean, it really it almost played like a board game in many ways. But that's where they were coming from with developing the first developments of RPGs is really what they have as an example. They had board games, Stratego, Monopoly, stuff like that. So that's where they started from, and then started introducing this concept into the marketplace. But now it's like the player agency and the engagement piece, because for a long time it really felt as though the systems were growing in such a way and expanding in such a way that they were trying to expand the worlds more and give people more options, so that
Mhm.
they could take their imagination and put it into the game, and there was mechanics there for them to do that, so they didn't necessarily have to go and invent reinvent the wheel in essence and make up all their own stuff. um, and that's a challenge for DMs. I mean, for people, your game masters today is all the time, all the energy and resources that you have to put into just trying to expand the world for your players. Um, and for a while there, it seemed like a lot of these games, like Advanced D&D, I'm gonna reference like Second Edition. Okay, Second Edition came out with a lot of expansions, second and third. Um, they came out with a lot of expansions, books dedicated to the different classes, such as a thieves book, and in like the mage's book, which I forget what it was called, but it had the original breakdown of all the different, like your sorcerer and your wizard and whatnot, were all in that book with some mechanics behind them, so that a player could look through that book and be like, okay, what is the actual difference between these things, and
Mhm.
how can I develop a character based along one of these lines. Now you fast forward to today, and you look at all of the rumors at this point around D&D 1, which is coming up. and the
Yep.
the the things that are being talked about that are going to be either taken out or dumbed down, or I'm not really sure how you want to talk about it. And I'm just, this is all speculation. Obviously, I haven't seen anything about the game yet, but the way it sounds, the specialization of races, the different attributes and things like that that you would get in the previous series, even the 5e series, where different races would have racial aspects that modified your character, and apparently those things are being taken out now because I don't know, they're racist or whatever. Um, this is a game. This is an imaginary world that we're creating and living out, and the expectation would be that some of these things would have definite advantages or disadvantages depending upon what they're encountering. And I think that kind of thing just makes sense in the game. Um, and it sounds to me like a lot of that stuff is being scrubbed from the new gaming systems, and they're basically taking those pieces out and trying to smooth those systems out to the point where you can play it. You can have a halfling character and an ogre character standing next to each other, and they both start exactly, more or less exactly the same types of attributes, same, you know what I mean, no racial modifiers. I mean, I'm
Mm.
sorry, but if you have a character that's 3 feet tall and weighs, whatever, 95 pounds, that's probably heavy for 3 foot, but a 95-pound character with their only discernible feature is big feet, and then you have a 9 foot tall character who probably weighs, about half as much as a small car. Um, there's some definite racial differences that need to be identified between those two characters.
Oh yeah, yeah, 100%,
you know,
100%.
I don't expect the halfling to win an arm wrestling match with the hill giant. You know what I mean?
I
That's
mean,
that's
no, not at all.
Yeah.
Um, and I agree with you. So to answer your question, are they pulling pulling away from that player agency and kind of player inter? Sorry about that. My dog is enjoying her chew toy. Go over there. Um, she's excuse me. That they're pulling kind of away and trying to do away with the player agency. At least I would say at the very least, and I agree with you. They are. I firmly agree with you. Especially in the tabletop scene. I would even hold on 1 second. Leave it. Um,
Good old meatball.
she just
yeah,
wants she wants to
she
be
just
on the
wants
stream.
attention.
She's a ham.
She does. Maybe you guys will see her at the end. And I apologize. But yeah, especially I mean in the tabletop industry, in some instances, I mean D&D being the most notable one. Um, but I also see it in games too, where again they're the streamline, the kind of railroad aspect of things. Um, but yeah, it's a shame because using your example in terms of D&D, there's D&D was always about the options. D&D was again, and I mean going back to Warren Spector and his design philosophy, D&D in the tabletop space and in games similar to it, they were always about the player option, the player agency, but also the player interactivity with the story, with creating that narrative. Any good DM will tell you, I set the stage and I have a larger narrative that I'm trying to tell or trying to present to the players, but at the same time the players on the other end are helping me tell that story by telling one of their own. They're not just along for the ride, which Warren Spector actually talks about in one of his articles. He's like, in um, no other medium do you get uh, excuse me, in no other storytelling medium do you get the interactivity that you could do with games. And that's video games, that's tabletop games, that's board games, that's any pick any genre. The player interacts with the game world, even if it's at its most basic level. The player is not just along for the ride where you see it in a book or a movie or a TV show, where we're just spectators just going along where the director or the writer tell us to. We have control of what happens, whether we win or lose, live or die, fail or succeed. Whether it's a video game or a tabletop, the player has some level of control, but the ultimate level of interactivity. Um, and it's a shame that the intricacies and the nuance, especially in the tabletop industry, with pointing directly to Dungeons and Dragons, is
Oh, I think did we just lose Rob? Oh no, he's back. Okay.
We did for a moment.
these. Oh, okay. I
A
didn't
little
even
bit.
notice.
I think you're back now, though.
There you are, buddy.
Okay.
Awesome.
Sorry for
Oh,
the
did we
technical
have
difficulties.
Did we? I apologize. I didn't even see chat. Did we have a question from somebody in the chat?
No, not yet.
No. Okay. Gotcha.
If-
I saw something about that.
Yeah, if anybody does, if you have some thoughts, please do share them with us in the chat. We would love to hear what your thoughts are and be able to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. That's actually a good point, Greg. Thank you for bringing that up. I meant to do so earlier. Yes, if anyone in the chat has a comment, kind of an idea of their own, an opinion, please bring it up. This is a conversation, a discourse on the industry and kind of where it's going. Since you're on stream, I would imagine you play some kind of video game at some point in your life. So please, your opinion is definitely welcomed here. And if we can get one of the articles posted in chat, that way people can kind of have a reference and an idea of the topic at hand. Greg, if you can post the link to that in the chat, that way folks can kind of
Sure.
take a look if they're interested.
And I do want to go back a bit to the D&D one and the way that they're handling kind of like the racial bonuses and stuff. And I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second, because I am one that does prefer fantasy races and games to have their own unique attributes and abilities.
You always got to have
But-
that one, right? Got to have that one who
Yeah.
decides to be.
Yeah, but I'm going to play devil's advocate here because I think there is some genuine pros to this. And there are cons, of course, but this is for the perspective. Because the way I see it is that by removing these, the importance of the racial benefits and abilities, is that it creates a bit more freedom in what you can do with the race, such as for instance, as kind of Greg was saying before, if you were to put like a halfling fighter next to a I don't know, ogre fighter, before the ogre would have the better say strength and constitution benefits, thus they would make the better warrior. But with the way things are going now, anyone can be that great warrior. So if you look at it one way, the options you have available to you have increased. You don't have to feel, say, kind of cornered by the race you're choosing. Like, oh, this one has bonus dex. I shouldn't be playing like a sorcerer on this thing. I should be playing on something that has bonus to charisma or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of gets rid of that worry about the race and the class matching up, and you can just sort of play what you want.
So I do have a response to that.
Yeah, go ahead. Again, I was just playing devil's advocate.
No, I get you.
but I think there's genuine points at the very
What,
least.
and I'm not gonna try. I'm not discrediting your points, Matt. Good points that you're making there. It really just okay, when I'm thinking about this, what I see is a little bit of, and this is kind of in the realm of, okay, just the, depending upon the players and the GM type of thing, because once again, I mean, it's an imaginary world that we're creating. Um, why does one race having racial bonuses which set them apart? We'll say bonuses. I mean, are they really bonuses? Maybe they're not really bonuses. It just depends on what you want. I mean,
Hmm.
if you want to create an ogre who is maybe the run to the litter type of thing. I mean, I see where the argument is, though. Okay, now I have these racial bonuses that I have to deal with. That's in a TTRPG. That really just comes down to, that's a conversation with your DM about what you want to
Exactly.
create. You know,
Yeah.
um, if yeah, and what you run into is a lot of times people are trying to design their characters based on a particular archetype that they've created or is maybe out there on Reddit or something like that. It's um, the
Taking like
ultimate,
someone's build or something.
right,
Yeah.
the ultimate build thing, which is a
Mm.
concept that really kind of bled its way into TTRPGs from the video game industry, where
It's the min maxers. Yeah.
right. But why would we, and this is the question to it, is, I mean, why would we completely scrub the idea, the concept of the uniqueness of each racial character type, just so we can create that balanced playing field? And then why would we feel that my human warrior, who, using the example that you gave, my human warrior is not a great warrior because the hill giant character or the ogre character is stronger than he is because he's an ogre? And why would that be? Honestly, I mean, unless we're using a min max style concept to try to approach the game, and I'm just putting up a counterpoint here, but I mean, unless we're
Mm.
using that min max ideal to try to approach the game, and we're stepping away from the idea of a little bit stepping away from the idea of role playing. I mean, I'm creating an RP character that I can play. Um, why would we do that? Why would we scrub that stuff out of the system and not have some sort of uniqueness to the races? And I'm a firm believer, just like in the classes themselves, I'm a firm believer that the races should have
Excuse me.
some form of uniqueness to them. That doesn't mean that you can't, like I said, that doesn't mean that between you and the GM, the game master, can't discuss that and say, hey, you know what? I want to create an ogre that is, not super strong. I want to create instead of having my +2 in strength, what if I had my +2 in intelligence and I was a super smart ogre? I was, not only the runt of the pack, but the genius among the idiots, basically. Um,
Kind of reminds me of Drumsy.
The smartest ogre you've ever seen. Unfortunately, he only comes out to about grade school or education.
that's that
um,
that's my counterpoint to it. I don't. I get exactly what you're saying, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing by any means, but I just, my argument is for having racial uniqueness in these games. I do believe that that's something that should continue forward. Maybe I'm just an old school gamer, but that's my thinking.
no, no, I agree with you. And Matt, I'm sure you have a comment or two for Greg's counterpoint, but let me squeeze something in there edgewise.
Yeah.
Um, I completely agree with you. And the reason why is again going back to some of the things that Warren put in one of his articles, which one is it? I believe it's Player Empowerment. Is his it's part of his design philosophy is a shared authorship, and it's true whether it's a video game or a tabletop game, um, any genre. Again, I'm going to say this probably ad nauseum, but it crosses all genres within the video game or gaming space. I will say a sense of shared authorship where both the player and be it the system, the game designers, the GM, excuse me, are working together to tell the story. Now, you have a unique advantage in tabletops where the DM, I mean, this is across all our TTRPGs or tabletop role-playing games for those of you who are new, that DM has final say. So and we all know it as GMs, the rule book that we get, those are guidelines. Those are a list of things to kind of give us a framework to work within. But GM discretion and GM fiat, that's a thing. So again, Greg, like you said, if you want to be the smartest ogre among a bunch of idiots, and your DM is cool with that and think that's interesting, and, he can go with that, or she, they, actually, either one, male or female, can go with that. But I do believe that taking out those aspects, again, those nuances, the intricacies, and the kind of differences from the get-go, like not even having them in kind of the base level, and letting the DM decide if they want to keep those, I think that's foolish. That's lazy game design, and that's definitely not shared authorship. That's definitely not telling a story together. So it's disappointing that it's happening, especially to such a beloved IP like Dungeons and Dragons. But I think and we've had this discussion definitely off, ad nauseum off screen. It's a business decision. How do we get the most people to tune in, to buy the books, to play the game, even if they do it like once or twice? They've already given me the money. So I already won. But that's my spiel. Matt, I know you've kind of been waiting in the wings for your reply there.
His rebuttal.
Yeah, no. Nah, I mean, like, as I said, I was merely kind of playing devil's advocate because I do kind of see the reasoning behind their decisions. However, I completely agree that, like, the different races that you choose in a game, like fantasy races, should be distinct from each other. Because I find that infinitely more interesting when you can play into the unique strengths of that race, and that becomes a part of the RP. And like as you're kind of saying before, if you want to kind of do something else, you can bring it up with DM, and that is certainly like one of the prime strengths of the TTRPG genre, where like the entire rule book is a mere suggestion. It's just telling you this is how you can play the game. That any DM, any dungeon master, any game master, whatever term that you use for who runs the game, can choose to do something differently. And that's an enormous power that the TTRPG genre has over any like video game that is done on a computer that works on a much more like strict sense of rules. So yeah, there is definitely a point there, and so that people still do have that freedom to break that mold of what the race usually does, assuming their dungeon master is cool with it, runs with it. I have seen unfortunate cases in video games where they kind of take a similar approach to one D&D, like say World of Warcraft. because I've kind of played that game on and off over the years. So there are times I come back after several years,
Hmm.
and the last time I went back was when was it? I want to say like not whatever expansion was after Warlords of Draenor. One or two expansions after that, I think.
That wasn't Cataclysm, was it?
No, no, Cataclysm is before that.
For Draenor. I think it
Uh,
was Miss of Pandaria, then Legion, some shit like that. I don't know.
it was no, I think it was the Legion one that came after Warlords of Draenor.
Mhm.
For a lot of demon stuff. So I went back because
Could have been
I
Battle of
had a
Azeroth for Brandia.
yeah, I think somewhere around there. So because back in the day, me and my brother used the same account, and he started playing again. So I was like, I'll just check up on my character, see what's going on. And
Yeah.
man, was I disappointed because I played a goblin, you know, just great. I loved the goblin, being a goblin hunter with a gun. I loved it so much, and I was so disappointed
What
when I
was your
saw.
character's name? Now I'm interested.
I named him Don Capone to kind of go with the whole like, mobster theme.
Don Capone.
Was
Jesus.
Yeah. So, and I was really disappointed when I went back because the racials as a goblin were gutted. Like, okay, there was like the little rocket you could shoot from your tool belt. That
Mhm.
was never good anyway. I wasn't too sad to see that one gone. But the important thing was the rocket jump. It was a mobility option that would launch you forward. And that was so useful, not just in PvP, but also PvE when I need to move somewhere quickly. And that
Mhm.
was gone.
Plus,
And
it gave you an option on how to how you wanted to interact.
Hey, Matt, Freybrand in chat is asking a couple of questions of you there. The Was that game you're talking about, the Battle of Azeroth?
that is one of the expansions. I think it was the one right before that. It was demon focused.
It was Legion then, because I
Legion.
remember I so my World of Warcraft journey started back during Vanilla when it came out in 2004. Yeah,
Legion.
and but most of my playtime was during Burning Crusade. Oh man, this is long ago. But yeah, I like you, Matt. I had the same experience. I came back after I left. Uh, excuse me, I left shortly after or before Wrath of the Lich King came out, and then I came back in Legion, and yeah, it was definitely let's just say a couple things were missing. Um,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
it was disappointing. But that kind of brings me back to a point that I read in one of the articles, where one of the things that Spectre and his teams try to do in any game that they work with, he tries to do as a design philosophy, is create problems that have multiple different approaches. And I know that sounds kind of par for the course nowadays, but go back even 10 years ago, 2013. That was still a very unique way to approach gaming, video games especially, because like you mentioned earlier, the difference between a video game and a TTRPG is a TTRPG has a DM that kind of sets the stage, and it's flexible. It's live. It's a living thing, and obviously within the confines of the rules, whatever rules they might be, whether they're the actual official rules or homebrew rules, you have room. You have a lot of room to maneuver, and you have a lot of room to approach problems. But one of Warren Spector's design philosophies and kind of one of the things that he strives to do with everything, there's a couple of things. One of them is adding something new, and I'll get to that in a minute. but give players the option. Again, going back to that player-powered, co-authoring philosophy is, and then he brought it up with regards to Deus Ex, in that he admitted it was kind of a mashup of three different genres. Your shooter, your stealth, and then
RPG.
RPG. He's like, well, if you sucked at shooting, you can stealth your way, but if you stuck at sneaking, you can shoot your way through, or if you sucked at both, there were things that you can do to get through the game that kind of played true to you as a player, but also perhaps the character that you build. And I think that philosophy, again, now we see it a lot more often. I think that's something that the gaming industry across the board really need to adopt.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, it's all about allowing for different play styles and giving people the options. Kind of going back to that meaningful decisions piece.
Mhm.
And you do see this in many games, though, on different levels. Because if you think about it, just a class system, being a warrior, rogue, or mage, is on that same idea, where you can choose to play by this different, essentially, set of rules that fits to your playstyle more. If you want to be the kind of cautious rogue sneaking around, a kind of headstrong warrior that just kind of charges in, don't bother thinking, just go swinging,
Mhm.
or whatever. It's the same concept, just when it came to the DSX, in between like the shooter, stealth, and RPG genres, he kind of took that a step further and didn't just make a different, like, say, character parameters that are best suited to other tasks. As at the time, those were almost mechanics taken from, as you said, different genres of games that weren't normally
Mhm.
mixed together.
Yeah.
Now, I think today, the idea of kind of like stealth in mini games, I mean, many games have stealth mechanics these days that aren't necessarily something you'd call a stealth game. But back then, that was like a pretty new combination of mechanics that it's one of those like kind of innovations. And yeah, like, again, like, he gave people that option to play the game very differently.
Yeah, play the
They
game
could.
that they kind of wanted to play in a way that they wanted to experience it. And he admits in his articles that at the time, a lot of studios and designers, colleagues and whatnot, kind of looked at him like he was crazy. Like, what are you doing? Like, no one's gonna do that. No one's gonna want to play that. Um, Greg, actually, I wanted your opinion on something.
Hmm.
So,
I have lots of
in
opinions.
yeah, I'm sure you do. In the article, uh, he brings up that point that at the time, colleagues of his from from other studios and whatnot kind of looked at him like he was crazy, and no one would want X thing or Y thing. Stick to what works. Do you feel, and this is again a question to both of you guys and to our viewers as well, do you think video games and gaming in general, I mean, you brought up the D&D situation
Mhm.
with I don't even think they're calling it one D&D anymore. They're like, it's like 5.5 or some shit. um
Huh.
I mean, that's not the official name, but I think that's something that it feels like that's what they're going for.
Just call
But
it
anyway,
6th edition.
yeah, just call it, yeah. Do you think that games like you mentioned earlier, they're starting to go back, they kind of backtracking in a way where, well, we're going to stick with what works. This is what sells. Let's do this. Um,
You're okay. So the business question, for sure. Well, and here's the thing with this, and that I really appreciate that question because it's the the life cycle of a product is really what we're talking about there. I know that's probably a little heavier than what we want to talk about here, but um, it really comes down to there's in the life cycle of a product, it's very very easy to slip into this, the popular mode. Follow the path of least resistance because we know it works and we know it's going to sell, and in that sense the industry becomes very highly commercialized. And what happens is, these companies, they'll work the game, um, until they get it to a point where it's at its peak, ideally. So you're at the height of the life cycle, and then
Yeah.
at that point it becomes okay. Now we feel that we've reached the peak, so now it becomes that's when you go into profit mode because the first any product you produce, your first year, ideally you have to plan that your first year you're not going to make any money on it. You're more than likely going to lose money on
Hmm.
it. And ideally then you can hit that profit bar after 1 year. Now video games that do well in the marketplace, typically they'll start to release some form of expansion within it, or at least be talking about um, releasing some form of expansion within the first year. That essentially is telling you
That is
that
true. Yeah.
essentially it's telling you that this game's doing well, it's profitable, so we're going to continue to push this because we haven't hit that peak yet.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
during that part of the life cycle, I mean, the players are going to be very happy because they're continually getting new content, fresh content. Hopefully, and that's in the if the company's smart, they're going to be engaging their players to find out, okay, what do you want? What do you you know what why are you playing this game, and what's going to make you play it more? What's going to bring your friends in and get them to play it too? Is essentially what they're looking for. And that's where you have the whole squeaky wheel gets the oil effect, because what you end up with is you will have the people that are the loudest about what they want, in the game, are the ones who are going to get the most. They're going to have a voice in the game. The people that don't speak up and say, "Hey, you know what? I think I would like this," or maybe if we spend a little bit more time developing this aspect of the game. I'm going to use an example here. Elder Scrolls Online as an example. Um, there is a huge player base in Elder Scrolls Online, or at least there was. I haven't. I played the game since the beginning, and I basically quit playing it like year and a half ago. And there's a huge player base involved with that game that is very into the economics of the game, and in the crafting piece and the harvesting piece and the fishing, and they really enjoy that stuff. They play content, but they really enjoy being able to just go through and use their imagination along with playing the game. Okay, but those people
Hmm.
are not the vocal ones. Those people are the people who are just, hey, I'm here to, this is my way of passing my time and just enjoy myself, maybe unwind at the end of the day, something
Yeah.
like that. And there's a huge base of those players that are out there, but they're generally quiet. They usually don't say a lot, make waves, that type of thing. The ones who do are the ones who get the changes made in the game. And as if you're involved with Elder Scrolls Online at all, you'll see, you know this, that the life path of that game early on was very very centered on trying to develop new content, getting new releases out there, which it would expand the lore and expand the series. And then I'm going to say probably about 2.5 years ago, they must have felt that they hit the peak of that life cycle of the game, and everything shifted to monetization. So it became very very commercial, and
Yeah.
essentially turned into, in my opinion, turned into a pay to win game.
Yeah. How
Um,
much money can we grab from the players now?
exactly, and that's generally a sign that that the game itself is on the decline, generally.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
And that's The sad part is, and I'm just going to switch this over to the TTRPG world. The sad part is that a lot of the systems that don't expand into that monetization piece and they focus purely on um, quality of the content that they're putting out. Um, it's a struggle. It's hard for those studios to actually keep themselves relevant. Um, and the reason why is because you know you have that base of people that are out there that want, you know, they want what they want. Period.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of times those are the people who are willing to spend money on the products.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of your casual players are, you know, they're more budget conscious, for whatever reason. I mean, it doesn't mean they don't have the money to do it. It's in some cases, I'm sure that's what it means, but they just don't want to, you know, they don't want to spend a pile of money. So the more you start monetizing your system, the more likely they are to start stepping away. They're going to start looking for, okay, you know, everything in this thing is costing me money now. If I want to have any of the cool new shit, then I got to pay for it. I don't like that.
Yeah.
I want to
Yeah.
be able to earn this stuff in the game. And those
Mm.
players, by the way, are actually more willing to do like subscriptions and stuff like that if the subscription means I have a chance to earn it in the game. And I don't have to pay
Exactly. Yeah.
more on top of what I'm already paying. You know, I'll pay my
Exactly.
$9
It's
or
like I'm
whatever.
paying twice.
Right. I mean, I kind of, you know, it's kind of like taxes, you know? I mean, geez. Um,
Yeah, pretty much.
but
Pretty much. But
go ahead.
you mentioned commercialization, and it kind of led me thinking to kind of a question I had to the both of you, and again to our audience as well. Guys, feel free to chime in, to jump in and with your comments and opinions and questions even about the article. And Greg, if you could post that again, the link, that way anyone who's joined recently can kind of take a look at it.
Certainly will.
Basically, my question to everyone is, with the commercialization of and the mainstream attention of games, the industry as a whole, video games, TTRPGs, do you think that's led the industry, and again, not all obviously, but some, especially the mainstream, the larger ones, I should say, to kind of take that back step and get, I mean, and again, this is my opinion, really get lazy with their design choices and make it so that the player doesn't have as much interaction with the story. Again, can't approach, a problem from various different ways because the design doesn't allow for it. Um, I would even argue, in my opinion, Warren Spector's design philosophy should be the standard. It should be the standard, no matter the game. Obviously, to varying degrees of of player agency and interactivity, and kind of power over the world and how their decisions affect it. You don't want a million questions and a million different branches in a shooter. It's not what you're there to do. But I think even in that respect, there should be a level of, I make this decision to handle this problem this way. A, that option should be there, and B, have the world reflect that. Um, so what do you guys think on that one?
Personally, I think it depends on what angle that you're coming at his idea of the player powered from, because when it comes to the game mechanics and how a person plays the game, if I think meaningful decisions are what make a game, otherwise the game just plays itself.
Exactly, yeah.
Um, However, in his articles, he does place a large emphasis on not just the game mechanics, but also the story and
True.
the way that happens. And that's something I don't believe is necessary for every game. I think it definitely has a place and it can be exciting. But there are also countless games out there where, yeah, it doesn't have like a branching storyline or anything like that. but they can still be fantastic games. Like you want to talk about, like, say the God of War reboot. That game didn't have like a bunch of different endings or different story paths, but it was still a great story. So when it comes to story, at the very least, a kind of more linear story is perfectly fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Because in a linear story, you can create a more solid kind of cause and effect between story events. Whereas with
True.
branching stories, you have all these different branches that usually end up converging at some point.
Yeah,
So
they're
usually
like
major
all roads
story
lead
beats.
to Mecca, so to speak. Like they have to go to either the same conclusion or a series of conclusions. Either way, they have to lead to the same thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I see what you're saying.
yeah, and it's when it comes to those types of stories, you usually notice that the, I guess, the writing may not be as tight, I suppose, or
Mhm.
as dense, because they have to make it so that a couple different causes and effects can essentially lead to the same place. Often, I mean,
That's an
and
interesting point.
sometimes
Yeah.
these points where the storylines converge, can have their differences, but these are usually the main story beats of the overarching story, and they usually share a lot of the same uh, story elements. So
Yeah, I
whether
was.
you
No, go
decided
ahead.
to side with so like, for example, there's a bad guy side versus a good guy side, whichever side you choose. In most of
Mhm.
these games, there's still going to be that same kind of big war at the end,
Yeah.
where the storylines converge.
Mhm.
And because of that, because the story is being split amongst these different paths, it's not usually as dense if it was a single storyline. Because if you were to try to make a very dense story with branching paths, I'm not saying it's impossible, but that's a lot of work.
I mean,
That's
Bioware did it.
Yeah. I mean, they've done very good. I mean, old time Bioware.
Yeah,
My
old
heart
time
goes out
Bioware.
to
Where?
the shell of the company it is now. But
Oh boy. Yeah.
yeah, again,
Yeah.
as I was saying, it's not impossible, but it is way more difficult, and in most cases you do see it. Uh, it's usually not as dense overall as if you're compared to a game with a singular story.
Yeah, Frey
True.
Frey mentions Mass Effect in there. I think that's definitely another title that fits the bill.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. I
that's
mean, it's
BioWare.
Bioware. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
Bioware title.
Mass Effect and Dragon Age Origins.
Yep.
Those
Those
two
two
games.
were absolute gems. Where I mean, they stayed true to the player powered philosophy, where player had agency. You could attack problems from different angles, use different methods. I mean, they're critically acclaimed for a reason. Uh, and I agree with what you were saying, Matt, about not everything needs a nuanced story. And again, that's not to say it doesn't have to have a complex story, but you don't have to it doesn't have to be an onion every time. You don't have to have super deep layers. But I feel like where his design philosophy and approach should be the standard is again in the mechanics, in the systems, not just the story, even though obviously the story is a good thing, but definitely in the systems where I could sit down and at a game. And again, this is to varying degrees. I could sit down in a game and figure out, okay, based on this game, based on the genre, based on the elements, I want to approach it this way and have that option to do that. So, huh. Um, yeah, I mean, it's it's interesting to see that this kind of level of interactivity and nuance and depth to the video game industry was existing. I mean, this is 20 years ago now, probably more now that Deus Ex came out. When did Deus Ex come out? Hold on, let me look that up.
Say by now,
Stand
like
by.
about 20 years?
More
A
than
long
20
time.
years. It's 23 years, in fact. The
23
Deus
years.
Ex,
Okay. Oh, that
yeah,
was
it
close
came out.
enough.
Yeah, 2000. 23 years. So that, and now, and again, now that kind of philosophy and approach is more much more prevalent than it obviously used to be. Um, but I fear, like I mentioned earlier, uh, mainstream exposure that gaming has gotten on the whole, has in some cases led studios to backtrack. And again, to what Greg was saying, from a business standpoint, hey, let's use what works, let's use what sells. That's what's going to make us the most money.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
It's a
It's
it's a super common trap to fall into, and just to name a few companies that you may or may not recognize that fell into this trap. um, Circuit City, BlackBerry,
yeah,
Blockbuster
yeah,
Video. I mean, all these companies that I mean, they went with they got into their market groove at the peak of their market, and they just decided that okay, we're going to ride this train because oh, we won. And that's the thing with it is this is this is not a we're not trying to run a marathon and win the race here when it comes to game development or anything really, but I mean game development, it's definitely something where you as a studio, and I just want to point this out from our standpoint as a studio. um, Part of the idea always has to be to create a system that's continually expanding and evolving over time, so that you can continue to remain relevant, or that your game can continue to remain relevant,
mm,
or your product, if you want to look at it that way. And the downfall of many of these studios is exactly that they get themselves hemmed into this idea that okay, and it's, do they care or do they not care about their product? I think the products that are out there that have ran a long time, and WoW is one of them. And I
yeah.
know there's a lot of people that have good bad things to say about WoW, but it's the longest running MMO, and it's at a point right now where they're they don't even have to do anything much to it, but there's still continued development that's there. They're still making modifications, things like that. Um, and most of those things are player centric things, and that's I think key to keeping that game alive. I think it's also key in the TTRPG world to keeping your game system alive. Um, it's one of the reasons why D&D has lasted as long as it has, is because there are continuous updates and upgrades and changes to it. Um, is this latest are the latest changes, the things that we started out talking about today, are they going to kill the game? Probably not. Are they potentially going to hurt it short term? Maybe, maybe.
Yeah,
It
possible.
kind of sounds that way, looking at the conversations that are going on out there, that these type of changes, which are um, I don't know, one could argue that they're somewhat politically motivated, I don't know. But those types of changes are they're they're going to impact the existing fan base, especially some of the people who've been around for a long time, in a negative way, because
Hmm.
they're drastically drawing back certain aspects of the world that has been created for us to play within. Um, and in that sense, from a DM standpoint, I mean, you're not supporting me anymore. This content that you're creating, this world that you're creating, is not supporting me anymore. Your focus is on drawing new people into the game, and I'm good with that. Absolutely. I mean, I want new people in the game too, but you know, you didn't make this easier for me to create this world for people. You made it harder, really, because now there's invariably in the game itself, there's going to be a huge increase of those conversations going on between your player and your DM about, well, what can I do? What can I create? What can I, and I think that's what those rules were there for in the game. You guys know me. I'm not big on rules. Um, but that's what that was created for, is to create a structure, a system of mechanics that you could base things off of, and to make it a lot easier so to roll into the RP piece to it.
Mm-hmm.
I got off in a little bit of a tangent there, but
Oh, that's okay. That's what we do.
I'm a little passionate about this because I've been in the RPG world for a very long time, and there's a lot of really good games out there. There's a lot of really good games that just never caught on as well, because they didn't have they didn't have the backing and the popularity or whatever. They didn't have the money behind them that Dungeons and Dragons or some of the other systems had. Doesn't mean they're bad games. It's just they were never able to reach their audience, and that's the key piece, I think, for beginning game. When you first get into this, and I know there's quite a few people here in the Twitch community that are working on game concepts and ideas that they have, and trying to develop new concepts, mainly around the RP that they're doing, and that's fantastic. It's kind of it's not a new phenomenon. It's been going on for a long time, but I just want to encourage those folks to look at these things from the standpoint of, don't build your audience. Absolutely, you want to continually be working on building your audience and getting people captivated with your story, but don't rush to the monetization piece. Obviously, you need, for it to work at all, you have to have revenue streams to produce the revenue that you need to be able to keep the game developing and moving forward. But
absolutely,
but don't be abusive with it. I guess that's the easiest way I could put it, because I do feel like a lot of the games that we see right now are abusive with it. And that's not just in the TTRPG world, but in the video game world overall, because it's very much, there's fees for everything, and here's the thing with this. I mean, they're IPs, especially in the video game world, or even in the TTRP world. They're intellectual property. So for when it comes to the base game, I mean, you only have to produce that once. So all of your development cost is right up front.
Yeah.
If you produced and released a game 10 years ago or 20 years ago, or, in the case of D&D, 40 years ago, I mean, there's no more investment in that original piece. And obviously, it's grown way beyond that original piece, but there's no more investment there. So at a certain point, you shouldn't be charging $40 a copy.
You'd think.
If you want to lower the bar to entry, maybe you start out there. Maybe you start out looking at some of this stuff that, hey, you know what, I can give you a basic mechanics system for $10, $15.
Yeah.
And then if you want to expand on it from there, which most people, once they get into, that's the thing about RPGs, that's the thing about tabletop roleplay is, there's a large percent of the people that all it takes is for them to try. That's it. All it takes is for them to try. And when they realize that, hey, you know what, this is a cheap way for me to have some really awesome entertainment and use my imagination. It doesn't cost me anything. I can use my imagination. Yeah, it's easy to get hooked. Absolutely, Frey. But if you really want people, introduce people to it, don't start making a bastardized system out of what you've already created and works. Step back.
The power of imagination.
Right. Right. Step back and say, hey, you know what? I want more people to be engaged with my game. So I'm going to take the basic rules to this game and I'm going to make them as affordable as possible. If not,
Yeah,
maybe even sell them, at cost or maybe cost plus 10. Just something simple, just so that barrier to entry is really really low. Because if you can get something like that, um, and especially in the economic state that we are pretty much worldwide right now, I think that's the way to grow. I think that's the way to really increase that barrier to entry piece, or decrease that barrier to entry piece, is to get it out there and make it affordable for people.
I agree. I mean, I agree. Like, I mean, I probably have just in D&D books alone. This isn't including the other systems I own. Well over a couple $100 just in books alone.
Yeah,
You know, it's not
I'm not
including
I'm not going to talk
everything
about what
else.
I have, but
I was
yeah.
gonna say you probably have probably sitting a couple $1,000 with your library. But yeah, I agree. You know, the lowering the barrier to entry monetarily instead of system wise. Again, taking away that player agency and player interactivity, and story opportunities really, is definitely not the way to go. Um, you know, and it's it's a shame that the larger, more known and kind of visually, or not visually, but like seen. I'm trying to find the right words, but those games and systems and companies that are in the public eye the most are doing that. Either it's, you know, the barrier to entry for monetarily is high, or they're really just dumbing down and kind of shearing away parts of the game that make it interesting for players. Um, yeah, Frey, I'm well aware of your proclivity to the plastic crack, as the moniker goes.
Good
Um,
old Games Workshop.
oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Also, Misty Dewdrop, thank you for the follow. We didn't miss that, I promise. Just didn't want to interrupt. But yeah, I mean, you know, I think Warren Spector definitely hit on a very at the time unique design and development philosophy. Now, thankfully, and you know, 2023 has become very much a
It's industry
uh,
standard. Or
yeah. I see. I want to say industry standard, but is it really?
no, that's a good point. You could say it's the
It's getting
elements
there.
that he kind of innovated on are a lot more common today than they were
I
back then.
I will agree with that. They are. A lot of those elements are. I wish more of them would be, uh, and hopefully, you know, more people take note of those elements. That as a game designer, as a game maker, you know, it's not me telling a story to my players so much as I'm interested in introducing them to a story, and they're, you know, getting into it the way they want to. Um, excuse me. But with that, I think that kind of covers all the bases, and I mean, I got nothing more. What do you guys think?
Well, I think we've got plenty more to talk about, but
Just not
unfortunately,
today.
right, we're actually a little bit over time now. I Do you have anything that you want to say to close us out here, Rob? I really quickly would just like to thank everybody that joined us today. Really appreciate the engagement and comments is awesome, and I look forward to seeing you back at our next
Next
episode.
week. Yeah, next week. Same time, same place on Wednesday, 2000 EST or whatever that amounts to in your particular time zone. As for comments to close this out, first let me address one comment from Moon Girl, I believe. It is definitely easier to get into D&D, considering the massive amounts of like homebrew stuff and you know uh, just free content out on the internet. I mean, if you have the player's handbook, you kind of have the game right in your hand. But with that said, again, like Greg said, thank you guys for tuning in. We'll be here next week, same date and time. Subscribe, hit that follow button, and to keep up to date for when we go live. And I guess other than that, thank you guys for coming out, and I'll talk to you again next time.
Awesome. Real quick
Yeah.
for our viewers, if you enjoyed this episode today, as Rob said, join us next Wednesday, same time, same place for the update log, and I'm sure that Rob will have some new and interesting challenges for us all to talk about. Also, if you would like to join us for an RPG game, we do have a Friday night game
That's
based
right.
in the cyberpunk world, where we are playing some interesting characters, and I am attempting to create a nice world for them to, do their thing in. But join us then, Friday night, right here, same time, same place. Thank you very much.
All right, guys, have a
Have a
good
good
night.
evening.
All right. Thanks for watching.